You do it every single day, and you probably think it makes you a good person. You do it in text messages. You do it in boardrooms. You do it in your own kitchen. Someone asks you a simple question. You decline an invitation. You change your mind about a project. And instead of just stating your truth, you launch into a 5-minute defense of your own existence. You build a watertight case. You offer evidence. You provide historical context. You issue a preemptive apology. You draft a 3-paragraph text message to explain why you cannot attend a casual dinner, agonizing over the punctuation, terrified that a period sounds too aggressive. You call this empathy. You call it being polite. You call it emotional intelligence. It is none of those things. Behind this constant, exhausting need to justify your choices lies something far darker and much more dangerous. It is a poorly healed psychological wound. Carl Jung, the pioneer of analytical psychology, identified this exact behavioral loop as a massive fracture in the human psyche. For Jung, the repeated frantic attempt to convince others about who you are, what you feel, and why you act is a symptom of severe self-neglect. The person who constantly explains themselves is actually begging for something they never received: permission to exist. Think about the physical sensation of being misunderstood. When someone misinterprets your boundary, what happens in your body? Your chest tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow. A profound, almost survival-level panic sets in. You feel an overwhelming urge to fix their perception of you. You rush in with words, trying to build a bridge of logic over a canyon of anxiety. You believe that if you can just find the perfect sequence of vocabulary, they will see your pure intentions and you will be safe from their judgment. This video is a deep analysis of why so many people live trapped in the compulsion to justify their reality, and what happens when they finally choose silence. This is not a surface-level communication hack. We are dismantling the machinery of your self-doubt. We will expose exactly why you over-explain, what it is costing you in daily power, and the specific psychological shift required to trade the exhaustion of external validation for the lethal, unshakable quiet of internal authority. When you stop explaining yourself, everything changes. Your relationships fracture and rebuild. Your career trajectory shifts. Your internal mental landscape goes from a chaotic courtroom to a silent sanctuary. But to understand why the world suddenly respects you when you stop begging for its understanding, we have to look at where you lost your power in the first place. This reflex did not appear out of nowhere. You were not born apologizing for taking up space in a room. You were trained. The compulsion to explain is forged in early environments marked by chronic emotional invalidation. These are contexts, often your childhood home, where your subjective experience was systematically disqualified. The invalidation was rarely loud or physically violent. It was subtle, insidious, and constant. You felt deep sadness, and you were told you were being dramatic. You expressed legitimate anger at a boundary crossing, and you were branded a difficult problem. You voiced fear, and you were met with irony, disdain, or a lecture on why your fear was mathematically incorrect. The internalized message was brutal. It wrote the base code for the rest of your adult life. My reality is illegal unless the room approves. You learned early on that your internal feelings possessed no inherent value on their own. They required a signature. They needed a stamp of approval from a massive external authority figure. To survive this environment without going insane, You developed a highly sophisticated, hypervigilant defense mechanism. You became a defense attorney for your own soul. You realized that if you could just construct a flawless logical argument for why you were crying or why you were frustrated, maybe you wouldn't be punished. Maybe you wouldn't be exiled to your room. Maybe you wouldn't be abandoned. This creates a terrifying dynamic. The child begins to view their own emotions as untrustworthy foreign invaders. They do not say, "I am sad." They say, "I am sad because of X, Y, and Z, and I hope that is an acceptable reason to cry in this house." You carried this survival tactic straight into your adulthood. When you compulsively explain yourself today to your boss, your partner, or a stranger on the internet, you are unconsciously trying to dodge that original rejection. You're attempting to control the other person's perception to guarantee your own emotional safety. You are living under the delusion that human connection is a court of law, and you are always on trial. You believe that if they just understand your logic, they will not abandon you. But there is a fatal flaw in this strategy. You're buying temporary peace at an exorbitant price. You are mortgaging your psychological autonomy. You're handing the keys of your self-esteem to a jury of people who are entirely unqualified to judge your reality. And the daily compounding interest of this debt is destroying you. Compulsive explanation is not a loud, dramatic failure. It does not look like a breakdown. It looks like a slow-motion, invisible betrayal. It happens in the microscopic fractures of your day, bleeding your energy out one agonizing justification at a time. Let us look at the brutal reality of how this manifests. It is laughing at a joke that makes your skin crawl, just to appear sociable, and then spending the drive home hating yourself for being a coward. It is saying yes to a favor you deeply resent while meaning no, purely to avoid being labeled selfish by someone who is actually using you. It is masking your deep emotional depression as just being tired because actual sadness feels too burdensome to defend to your partner. It is disguising your rightful, burning anger as calm rationality, terrified of appearing immature or unhinged. Every single time you do this, a transaction occurs. With every concession you make in the name of harmony, you leave a piece of your core identity behind. Jung understood this behavior as a direct reflection of an ego completely disconnected from the self. Your ego, which should simply be the functional operating system of your consciousness, has been hijacked. It has become a terrified servant to the audience. It constantly reconfigures itself to become exactly what the room demands. The result is catastrophic. You lose the ability to hear your own voice. You stop trusting your intuition. When your gut tells you a situation is dangerous, you immediately cross-examine your own gut instinct. You ask yourself, do I have enough evidence to feel uncomfortable right now? Doubt completely replaces inner confidence. This process of self-abandonment is highly insidious because modern society actively praises it. We love people who are flexible. We applaud people who are easy to get along with. We promote people who never cause friction and who can always explain away their own needs for the good of the company. But beneath that false, polished harmony is a suffocating emotional exhaustion. You are living for an audience, but you are slowly dying backstage. Jung stated that this internal fragmentation is a primary root of modern neurosis. It is the birthplace of chronic, free-floating anxiety. It is the source of the crushing sensation of emptiness you feel when you are finally alone in your car. It is the exact reason you have a total inability to make a simple decision without asking 5 friends for their opinion. The soul is screaming to be recognized, but you keep suffocating it with logical explanations to keep the peace. You rationalize your own boundaries out of existence. You tell yourself, they didn't mean to cross that line. They are just under a lot of stress at work. I shouldn't be angry. You're doing their PR work for them. You're managing their image in your own mind at the expense of your own reality. Whose life are you actually living? If your reality requires constant auditing by everyone around you, you are merely a character in someone else's script. You are an NPC in your own existence. You are not the author. But rewriting this dynamic requires stepping into a void most people are terrified to enter. The transition away from over-explaining is not peaceful. It is violently uncomfortable. True psychological freedom has absolutely nothing to do with making people understand you. Listen to that again. Freedom is not the moment the jury finally hands down a not guilty verdict. Freedom emerges from a completely different mechanism, the cultivation of internal authority. This is the absolute cornerstone of Jung's concept of individuation. Internal authority is the terrifying, monumental ability to validate your own subjective experience without requiring a single nod of approval from the outside world. It is the defining moment you stop asking the universe, will they understand why I am doing this? And start stating with cold precision, it is entirely irrelevant if they understand. This is true for me. This is not a morning routine. This is not a communication hack you learn in a corporate seminar. It is a tectonic shift in your psychological axis. You are forcibly relocating your center of gravity from the periphery of external validation, dead back into the center of your own spine. But do not mistake this for an easy, serene process. Jung noted that individuation requires you to cross the desert of inner solitude. When you silence the urge to justify yourself for the very first time, the immediate physiological aftermath is panic. Imagine the scenario. Someone asks you to take on a massive project over the weekend. Normally, you would write a thesis on how your schedule is packed, how your car broke down, how you have a family obligation, practically begging them to rescind the offer. Instead, you deploy internal authority. You look them in the eye and say, I am unavailable to do that. And then you stop talking. The silence that follows will feel like falling out of an airplane without a parachute. The part of you that relied on explanations to feel safe will scream at you to open your mouth. Your nervous system will flood with adrenaline. Your brain will beg you to send one more text to clarify. It will tell you that they hate you. It will tell you that you are about to be fired, abandoned, and ruined. You must hold the line. You must experience the agonizing discomfort of holding a no without offering a drop of guilt to sweeten the medicine. You must end a conversation without providing a bibliography of reasons. You do this not out of arrogance. You do not do it to be cruel. You do it out of the radical foundational realization that your existence is not a plea bargain. You offer your truth as a definitive statement, not a starting point for a negotiation. You stop speaking to be approved of, and you start speaking to be real. And the moment you adopt this physical and mental posture, the environment around you will react. It will not be subtle. The system that relied on your submission will begin to violently short-circuit. The silence that arises from internal authority is deeply unsettling to the rest of the world. When you stop justifying yourself compulsively, you're not just avoiding a minor argument in the kitchen. You are deactivating an entire invisible system of psychological control that others have been using to feed on your insecurity for years. For people who have always expected you to bow, to correct yourself, to over-explain your boundaries until they crumble, your new silence feels like a direct attack. It is a silent revolution. It is the implicit, unassailable declaration. I owe you absolutely nothing to be who I am. Watch what happens to the manipulators, the narcissists, and the energy vampires in your life. Emotional manipulation relies entirely on perceptible vulnerability. It requires your deep-seated fear of being misunderstood. It needs you to react. It needs you to dance. A manipulator will throw out an accusation specifically designed to trigger your inner defense attorney. They want you to explain yourself because, as long as you are explaining, you are on the defensive. As long as you are on the defensive, they are the judge. But secure silence is a stone wall. It does not dance to the music. It does not take the bait. It simply exists. When they accuse you of being selfish, and instead of launching into a tearful defense of your generosity, you simply look at them and say, I understand you feel that way, and walk away. You completely shatter their attempt to control you. In psychology, this reaction from the manipulator is called an extinction burst. When a behavior that previously yielded a reward, your submission, suddenly stops working, the manipulator will escalate their tactics. They will become louder. They will call you arrogant. They will accuse you of changing for the worse. They will rally flying monkeys to tell you how unreasonable you are being. Let them. Their discomfort is not your jurisdiction. The relationships built entirely on your submission will collapse under the weight of your new boundaries. Do not try to save them. Let the fire burn. When you stop explaining yourself, you break the implicit pact of inferiority. You vacate the cramped, suffocating space of the subordinate and occupy the space of an equal. Some people will immediately distance themselves from you. Good. This is not a failure. It is a long overdue realignment. Your silence is now functioning as a high-powered psychological filter. It is separating the wheat from the chaff. It reveals who was sitting at your table out of genuine respect for your soul, and who was only there because you were easy to manipulate and eager to please. Jung warned that individuation requires ruptures. Losing parasitic relationships is not a punishment. It is an eviction notice to the ghosts of your past. By refusing to put your identity on trial, your silence physically transforms into a heavy, undeniable presence. A presence that commands the room without ever needing to raise its voice. A presence that establishes ironclad boundaries without needing a single moment of aggressive confrontation. Once the smoke clears from the collapse of your unbalanced relationships, you are left in a new landscape. The desert of inner solitude Jung spoke about begins to bloom. Without the constant noise of drafting explanations in your head, you experience a profound cognitive relief. The mental bandwidth you previously spent anticipating how others would react to your choices is suddenly returned to you. You begin to direct that energy inward. When you stop rationalizing your emotions for the benefit of an audience, you actually start to feel them fully. This is where true psychological integration begins. You realize that sadness does not need to be justified by a traumatic event to be valid. It just needs to be felt. You realize that your desire to switch careers, end a relationship, or move to a new city does not need to make logical sense to your parents. It only needs to resonate with your own internal compass. External silence opens the space for internal listening. You begin to rebuild your relational ecosystem based entirely on truth. You start attracting a completely different caliber of human being. When you no longer emit the frantic frequency of someone desperate to be understood, you stop attracting predators who hunt for that exact vulnerability. Instead, you attract people who possess their own internal authority. Communication in these new dynamics is entirely different. It is clean. It is precise. There is no subtext. There is no hidden ledger of emotional debts. You say what you mean, and you trust the other person to handle their own emotional reaction to your truth. You do not manage their feelings for them, and they do not demand that you do. It is the difference between speaking to be approved and speaking to simply transmit reality. In practice, this looks like the firmness of saying, "That doesn't work for me," and letting the sentence hang in the air. It looks like the refusal to participate in a circular argument where the other person insists you justify a boundary you have already set. It looks like the ability to endure the profound, momentary discomfort of someone else being disappointed in you and remaining entirely whole while they process it. You stop outsourcing your self-esteem. You recognize it as a resource that is generated internally, never imported. This marks the definitive break from the old, conditioned self, the frantic child trying to avoid punishment, and the birth of the rooted, autonomous adult. There is something deeply magnetic about a human being who feels zero need to explain themselves. It cannot be faked. It cannot be forced through artificial arrogance. It is not about being cold, aloof, or emotionally unavailable. It is the frequency of psychological integrity. An integrated person does not beg for space in the world. They occupy it as a birthright. They communicate clearly. They express themselves with profound depth, but they never ever convince, because they do not operate from the baseline assumption that their reality is up for debate. Their words carry immense weight because they are anchored in a solid center, not a hidden lack. The paradox of the human condition is this: the less you seek the world's approval, the more respect the world is forced to give you. Integrity has density. It alters the physics of the room you walk into. You do not need to present empirical evidence for your feelings. You simply state your position, and the sheer, unbending coherence of your physical posture makes that sentence absolute law. In a world where the vast majority of people live entirely disconnected from themselves, making decisions based on the algorithm of public opinion, ignoring their own feelings for fear of seeming too sensitive, and violating their own boundaries with forced smiles just to avoid being seen as difficult, a person who simply stands in their truth is revolutionary. You become a mirror. Your internal authority reflects the lack of authority in others. This is why some people will initially hate you for your boundaries. You remind them of the power they are too cowardly to claim for themselves. Every compulsive justification carries a camouflaged insecurity. It whispers, "Am I enough?" The integrated person no longer asks this question. They know they are. Even when the world insists on screaming otherwise, they do not flinch. The need to control what others think about you evaporates. You realize that you cannot control their perception anyway. They will view you through the lens of their own unhealed wounds, their own projections, and their own limitations. Let them. Their perception of you is a reflection of them, not a mandate for you to change. You stop living to be understood, and you start living to be true. When you stop explaining yourself, everything changes, not just inside your own mind, but in the physical reality around you. It is as if a new dominant frequency begins to emit from your core. You no longer broadcast the frantic signal, "Please understand me so I can feel safe." You emanate a new law. I know exactly who I am, and I do not require your permission to exist. The world inevitably responds to this frequency. Jung knew that the human psyche is guided by energy, by presence, and by internal structure, not by rational verbal justifications. The person who constantly tries to be understood emits a vibration of submission. The one who no longer explains themselves emits strength, clarity, and undeniable authority. Unbalanced dynamics collapse. Manipulators starve and leave. Mutual respect becomes the baseline for every interaction in your life. Respect starts from the inside out, and the very first step of that process is the absolute refusal to justify your own existence. This journey requires ruthless presence. Tomorrow morning, in a moment of doubt, the impulse to explain yourself will return. The boss will ask a loaded question. A partner will challenge a boundary. It will seem so much safer to please them. It will seem so much easier to yield and offer just one little explanation to keep the peace. In that exact moment, you must remember the cost. Every single time you swallow an explanation, you reaffirm your own existence. You consolidate your psychological integrity. You take your rightful place in the world, not as someone who begs for a seat at the table, but as someone who owns the room. The era of the endless apology is over. You owe the world nothing but your authentic, unedited presence. So, it is time to draw the line in the sand. I want you to go into the comments right now and document this psychological shift. What is the one specific explanation you find yourself repeating the most? What is the pathetic justification you are officially retiring today? Is it apologizing for needing rest? Is it explaining why you don't want to attend a family event? Write it down. Put it in stone. This isn't just a comment. It is the first act of reclaiming your internal authority. And if you are ready to stop playing a character in someone else's script and start building an unbreakable mental architecture, hit the subscribe button, join the Mind Base. We don't do surface-level communication hacks here. We dismantle the psychology of failure, one virus at a time. Stop explaining. Start existing. See you in the next one.